Hello everyone, welcome to today's training session, and this is a series of data structure in X++. So we are learning just basic structures like base enums, EDTs, tables, and relationships, and various properties involving around it, including the label file, and then we'll also cover user interface in coming sessions. Definitely, and we are here just creating a resort management system. So in the resort management system, so far we have created resort table, a resort group. Basically, resort table will contain the information about resorts. So this is kind of a main table. If we can see the properties, so basically so the table group here is main, which we have explained in the previous session as well. So then there is resort parameters, which we covered in our last session, and the resort group is basically containing the group information or categories of resort table. So basically it is having a foreign key relationship with the resort table. So that key value, that field value is already in part of resort table. So now we'll just finalize the resort table, which is the main table containing the resort information, and there are few more fields which we need to create. So we'll just start with the EDTs first. So there should be a property registry number for n because the resort is itself a property, so that need to have a registry number. For that number we need to add an EDT, and let's add a new item here, and that already used, so we can pick a value. We can select this EDT, and the type will be the string. So we can just put a name here like pkr underscore and resort registry num. So this will contain the registry number for this property. And then once we have created the registry number, then we can basically set the properties for this EDT. So first of all, we need to find the length property or string size basically, and by default it is 10, which we basically need to increase here, and we'll make it like 25 would be suitable. And then we also need to give it a label. So that label we need to just go to the label file, and so in the here we need to just put the label, basically registry number. We can also put property registry number, but this label then it will be very long, so it is easy to put it like registry number. And then in the description we can explain that okay, this is a property registry number, in order to explain further about this label. And then in the label we need to put it same way, registry num. And we need to also have a help text for this, so we can put like uh, the resort registry number in order to explain the field. And we can put here like registry num ht help text, and we can just then copy it and go to the EDT, and then in the EDT we can just paste it in the label, and just above it the help text. So we'll just copy the help text label, and we'll just place our help text in the help text property. So this is how we have done for this EDT, the registry number. We'll just need another EDT type, which will be the date type basically, and acquisition date, so that we need to just pick EDT of type date, and we can just put PKR resort acquisition date basically. So once the EDT is there, we need to just create the label in the same way for this one. And for label, we need to just open the label file, which is now hidden here. We'll just select this, and we can put here like acquisition date, and we can put here like property acquisition date, and similarly we can just place help text as well. So just create a new label, and we can also copy from here acquisition date ht, and then we can put it the date that the property was acquired. So that's it, and we then can copy the acquisition date label, and then just place in the EDT of dates type basically, and just go to the label and place the acquisition date label, and also same way the help text for the property. And we also need to set for this one the extends property, because this EDT will be extending another EDT, and normally that is trans date, which we have already discussed in previous session. So trans date is not available here, you can see. So what we can do is we need to check whether this package was already included in the model. So for that we need to just go to extended data type, and find the trans date EDT, which is basically part of package called application platform. So the model which we are using is PKR model, which is my custom model. So definitely I need to go to the model management, and I need to go to update model parameters, and I need to select my model here, which is PKR model, and just click next, and then just I need to check here that application platform is already included basically here, and that is already part of the package, so there should be no problem. So let's check once again. Yes, it is available, but in the search there was a certain, yeah, now it is showing basically. So trans date is now our EDT resort acquisition date is extending trans date, which is basically transaction date. So this will be created as a date time on the database level. Just save all the changes, and now what we can do is now just we have created these EDTs, we need to just place them in our resort table. So just go ahead with the acquisition date and drag and drop on the fields node, and same way you can place the registry number there, and then we can just remove the prefix. So even no need of resort to repeat here, because already it is a resort table, so no need. of placing resort here. We'll just remove the resort word. So that is very clear that resort is already table itself. So I have removed the resort word. Also we can remove it from this resort ID, but I will keep it here. So the remaining one I have removed because that is totally repetitive, so no need to repeat them. And now we need to just make sure that order is correct. So the ID will be first one and the name will be the second one, and I will just use alter and up arrow or down arrow to sequence it. So after name the group ID will be there, and after group ID the types will be there, cost wise and location wise types we have already created, and then the registry number, and then basically the lastly acquisition date will be there. So in this way we have sequenced it, and we'll just save it, and we'll make sure to have the synchronized database on build as true on whenever we build it. So next what we need to do is in a resort table we need to go to the registry number field, and in the properties of this field we can find a property called alias 4. So this alias 4, as in the help text also. So next what we need to do is just go to the registration number field and find the alias for property, and as the help suggests, select which field this field is an alias for. So basically whenever this registration number uh, is used in another foreign key table, so that will replace with vehicle ID. I mean, if I am using alias for here, so next what we need to do is find the registry number field, and go to the properties and find the property called alias for, and we need to put here the resort ID as a field here. So basically what it does is it allows this property allows the user to enter for example registration number in the vehicle ID field in foreign tables. So basically it will cause to look up a resort and replace the entry with resort ID. So this will be alias for property here. So in this way we have just put the alias for property, and then we need to just make sure that the vehicle group ID is mandatory, which must have already set. If it is not, so we need to just make it mandatory. So it is not mandatory here, and we need to turn it to yes in order to make it mandatory field. And now we need to just save it, and resort ID, if we can check, so allow edit is yes here in basically resort ID field, which we need to make it no, because this is primary key we need to make it, or alternate key. Primary key will be the rec ID which is a built-in field, but this one we need to make sure that it is unique, should not repeat. So that we have make the mandatory previously, and allow edit will turn it to no, and allow edit on create will be yes, and mandatory will be also yes, because otherwise it should not contain a null value here. So next what we need to do is also we need to note that this base enum type which I have created in previous sessions, so the base enum cannot be mandatory here. I mean, if we want to make it mandatory, so basically base enum, if you know that I have already explained that it start from a 0 value, that is a small integer 0, 1, 2s and 3s. So if you make it mandatory, so it will not allow the zero value. that is the first literal in the base enum itself. So for example, if I go to the base enum here, if I can open it, so this first one will be having the 0 value, and then 1, 2, 3 and 4. In this way this will be integer value. So we need to then make sure that first value should be, or first literal should be just like not set or something to identify it is not already set. So then if we make it mandatory, then it will not allow that first value. So in this case this is a valid value. So hill station is a valid value in place of 0. So will not be making it mandatory, otherwise it will not allow hill station. So I hope that that clears it. And then what we need to do is, after resort ID is set, allow edit no, allow edit on create yes, and mandatory yes, then we can just create an index here that will be resort IDX. And in this index we need to just place the resort here, resort ID field. We need to just drag and drop, and allow duplicates is already no here. And then the group ID field, basically, which is the category of a resort table, for that we need to also create one index here. So we'll just create it as resort group IDX, and then we can just drag and drop the group ID field into it. And we need to just note it here that basically these group fields are used only for example aggregations or search query, and that is only purpose of these fields. And so I will just place in the index here. And so the index must not be unique, so I will make it allow duplicates yes, and index type is okay. So once we are set with this, and here we have set it like allow duplicates no, then we need to just make sure the property of the table here, and whether we have set all the required properties already. So we have not yet set the label title fields that we need to just create here. So for the title field, we can pick here like resort ID as a title field, and then we need to pick title field 2 as name. And in the label we need to just create a label for this table. And also we need to make sure cache lookup should be found here, and basically it is for efficiency purpose to remove reduce the round trips to the databases. And then the cluster index, we need to set here our resort IDX. And similarly the primary index, we need to also set it as a resort IDX. And table group is already set to main. And we need to also make sure the created by field is set to yes. Created date time, these are for audit purpose. Whenever a new record is created, so the user ID and the timestamp will be stored. So then also the modified date and time also need to be yes. And also there is one documentation which is called basically developer documentation, which we need to also create a label for. And so let's create the labels now. Now just close the base enum here, go to the label, and in the label file, so the table name will be the label of that table. So we can just put pkr resort table. So instead of we can remove the prefix here and just place like resort table, and then just create a new label here, and read like resort table contains the resort records. That's it, I think, and we can just developer documentation, just copy it and paste in the label, and similarly just copy the developer documentation and place it in the developer documentation property, which is here. I will just place it here, and that's it. Form reference, I will just keep it blank for now until we create the form for these tables. And then also we need to check here field group already we have created, and that is including the resort ID, name, and types. And so we can add here the newly added fields, which can be a group ID as well, and the resort ID name was already there and types were there, and we can also place these two fields into the overview, and we can make it same sequence. Type is cost and registry number. So basically we can create here another field group, and we can just name the field group like details, and similarly this details we need to find the label for, and I think the sys label will be available for this one. Just place here and match exactly and find the label. So there are various labels already, and just find for a sys label. Yes, this one is okay, and I can just copy it, and then I can place it in this new field group, and I will just drag these two fields like registration number and acquisition date into the details field group. So basically this is to show on the header of the form when viewing the details of the vehicle. So this will show so the basically overview field group is for the list of records, and details is basically placed at the top of details form, where basically the user would want to review the full details of a vehicle. So So now in the details, we would also rather include all the other fields as well, which is resort ID, name, group ID, and types, because this will contain even more details. Again, I need to just sequence it. Group ID, type, and cost. Basically, these are different, views of a form. One will be the header, and the other one will be details. So whenever the user will click details group, so even more details will be shown, including whatever the fields were already in the overview. So in this way, we have just finished it, and then so we need to just go with the existing field groups. So auto lookup is already having resort ID, name, and types here, and so a resort ID need to be first here, and so I think just minimize it and find basically the relationship. This resort group which we are already have completed. So and I think the cardinality is 0 and more, and basically related table cardinality is 0. So basically this is exactly 1, means the resort group will contain because it is mandatory, so it cannot be 0, so it will be exactly 1 in the related table. So what about on delete? On delete is none here, so we need to make it restricted, which we have already explained in my previous training session, that it will not allow to delete if there is a child record. So the child record is basically a resort group record. So if that exists, so it will basically so it will not allow to delete the parent record, basically that is a resort group. So resort group table record will not be allowed to delete until the child is deleted. So this will not allow. So this need to be restricted. And then relationship type is association, which is correct here. And that's it. Then we need to also implement the methods already done, like check exist, text not exist. We can review these methods. So it will just throw an error when from the check exist is called. So it will throw an error calling the method itself, that resort ID was not found. So this will be a thrown message already in the label file. Just save it. We need to just override another method, which is just right click inside the class and go to insert override method, and here you can find initValue. Basically this initializes the uh, values in the table record whenever it is inserted. So this is also a useful method. So what I need to do is just the parameter table is a pkr resort parameter, and which I need to just declare here resort parameters, and that I need to write resort param equals to pkr resort parameter and calling the static find method. So without parameter basically, so it will return the only single record which exists in the parameter. So and then it will assign to the table buffer here. So what we then need to do is we need to just initialize it. So we can call the field called default resort group here, and we will assign this to this dot basically group ID. So this for the new programmers is important. This keyword basically references to the current object. So the current object of the class will be referred here. So this is this dot, then it will IntelliSense will bring all the methods or the field names. So I can again call it. So you can see the methods are also there, and if you can see, these are fields. Fields are also available to the current object. So attributes plus behavior both are available. In this way I have initialized using the initValue method. I will just remove the documentation for simplicity, but you need to just put the documentation in order to explain whatever the methods are doing. So the find and other methods are already there, and we can just override one more method, which is basically validateField method. Just remove it. Just go to validateField, and validateField and validateValue are same. Only one is working on field ID, the other one is on the value field name basically. So then later on they did not remove it. Actually the decision was reversed. So validateField was earlier. So I will just remove the documentation, and in the so always remember that whenever this whenever you override it, so there is just like this body is created. So this ret basically is an abbreviation of return value, but normally it is good idea to make it like is valid, a sensible name to the variable, so that will be more understandable and with the meaning. So then this is valid is returned from the super call, that is the same method in the parent class that is common. So that super will be passed with the parameter, and it will return a boolean value which will be in is valid, and then I need to implement my own logic here. So I can implement a switch case basically. For the new programmers, the switch case works just like if else condition, a logical comparison basically, and the pattern is just like you can just introduce the keyword of switch, and then whatever the value need to be checked, that need to be placed here. So in this case basically field ID to check need to be placed in this switch, and then what we can do is basically we need to put another case keyword, and field ID to check basically will contain the ID value of field, and that we need to basically use a field num method which need to have two parameters basically, and the one parameter I will be adding like resort table, and the other one need to be like acquisition date. In this way, the table name and the field name, once I passed it, it will return the field ID value here. So every field has ID value in each of the table. Even the table has an ID value. So TableNum will return the ID for the table basically. So then I need to place a colon here and a break statement basically that need to end a case statement. So then I need to, after colon and before break, I need to implement my own logic here, and that I need to basically compare with the acquisition date should be always less than current date, today's date, means no future date can be added. So that validation I need to check it here. For that, what I need to do is I need to have either variable or I need to use a basically client time zone function, and that function is basically available as a static method in a datetime class called get client machine time zone static method. So for that, what I need to do is just use time zone and then just put client time zone variable here and just make it equal and date time util get client machine time zone. So this will return the client time zone here, and then what I need to do is basically I need to introduce a variable of date type that is for today, and then using another method basically date time util and then get system date basically, which will return uh, the current date, today's date, and the only parameter which need to be passed is the client time zone. So that I will pass like client time zone already held here. So this will assign today's date to the today variable. This I could have done in single statement. How this static method I would have just placed it inside this, but that would not be suitable to I mean, in order to make it very clear for a reader. So it is better to create two variables instead of putting the same static call in the parameter itself here. So in this way, now since we have today's date, we need to just compare this dot acquisition date. If it is less than today's date, so then you should catch it, and we should use the isValid variable and pass a check failed. Check failed will also throw an error, and then we need to create one label and place it in the check failed, and for that just go to the label file, and you need to just create it here like the acquisition date must be today or prior instead of the future acquisition date. So warning, I can just copy it and paste it here, and it will throw the warning. And this is how we have just implemented the validate field. Let me explain once more. Basically, validate field method validates each of the field whenever it is a value is entered into that field. So as soon as the focus changes, so it will check the validation against the field which is being entered or filled in. So that if comes in the switch case, so if the case of that field is entered here, so that will be the logic will be executed. If the field case is not here, so it will go outside of this, because that field ID is not available to catch here in the case statement. So it will then return whatever the is valid value is passed from there. If it is not the case, I mean the acquisition date is entered, so it will come here, and I can place it empty line here, and then the basically first line is collecting the client time zone, and then it is passing to the get system date in order to get the today's date as per client time zone, and then the today date is checked against the acquisition date which is now entered by the user. So if it is acquisition date is basically so here we need to just change the sign here, because acquisition date need to be uh, if it is greater than today's date, then definitely it will be a future date which was entered, which is wrong. Basically it should be either current date, that is equals to today, or less than. So if it is greater than, then the warning will just express that acquisition date must be today or prior, or we can just put it just acquisition date cannot be a future date. So I can just change it, cannot be a future date, so that is more appropriate. And in this way, acquisition date, once it is for future, so then it will check this validate field method. Now we need to just save everything, just save and close, and build the project, so that if there are any errors, so it will show up. So basically we need to explain here that in the validate field, since we have used the switch statement, so always in validate field we need to introduce the switch statement, only even if it is one case, so that can be a switch case statement. But if statement, basically it looks easier, but it will not be a maintainable, it cannot be maintainable in the code itself. So because the cases might be in future, there can be many cases for each of the fields in the table. So instead of if and then if else and if else, so many structure will not be a suitable case here. And then we also introduce here the initValue and validate field methods basically. So basically before we used to have the variable declaration at the top, but in D365 the variable can be declared anywhere where we like, but this should not be overused, and that helps or supports in basically handling the scope wherever the variable is declared. So in that scope that can be used. And then also there is one explanation about datetime util which we used here. Previously in AX 2012 system, get date function was used, which is now deprecated. so that cannot be used, and it need to be avoided. Instead, we need to use the datetime util that provides also a better handling for time zone, because the dates can be different across the time zone throughout the globe, and can differ also between the client's machine, that is browser in this case, and or the server also. So basically, the server in D365 FinOps basically is not aware where the server is, and it can be anywhere on Azure cloud. So that should not be the case. Rather than a client time zone should be taken in consideration here, and so the validate field method which we have used here. So what will be the sequence of validation? Basically that the value is valid for the type such as valid date in a date field, and if the field is a foreign key, then check the value exists in the parent table, and if the field is mandatory, check that it is filled in or that it is not zero for numeric and enum fields. So this will be these validation will already be fired by the super call inside the validate field, which will cover the basic validations. Let me just open it. So here you can see the super basically checks these three things, like if the value is valid for a type, such as it can be a valid date in a date field, so that need to be checked in the, that is already checked in the parent implementation. And then also if the field is also foreign key, so that also checks whether the value exists in the parent table, and if the field is mandatory, that will also be checked whether it is filled in, and it is not a zero value for numeric and enum fields. And one more explanation is basically TableNum and FieldNum, which I have used here. The FieldNum here, so we cannot directly know the field ID value, and if I can show you by opening a table, and you cannot know here that what is the ID value here. So that in AX 2012 was visible in the properties, the table ID, but in D365 you cannot see basically the ID value for a table, and similarly ID value for a field. So that need to be implemented in the code itself by using FieldNum and TableNum, and that basically will assist us. And so these basically do not these functions are not accepting any string, so they want the basically type name. Type name here is like a table itself, or a field type or field name need to be entered instead of a string value covered with the quotes. And there can be other intrinsic functions as well, like table str or field str or class str, that also return the string value for a table or a field or a class class string. So those string value will not be acceptable here, and that will cause a compilation error. And then Basically, default field and init value methods are used for setting the field default. So whenever the table behind it, I mean the form when we'll create, so whenever we create a new record, so the result table, if it is a data used as a data set or data source for that form, so basically at that time the init value will be fired. Init value will be fired, and this method will basically populate the default value which is already set in the parameters to the group ID field value. So in this way the defaulting logic we can accomplish. And there is one more method which I need to show by insert override method, and that is this default field method. So this will default the field value, and this will be called when default row will be called. So default row is another method. So whenever a new record is created, so default row method is called. So default row will call the default value inside it, and basically default row and default field both are used for data entities. Whenever a record is created in data entities or Excel add-ins or Office add-ins, so there this default row or default field basically internally within the default row will be called in order to enable it to edit in Excel. And default field basically is not used inside the form, only it is used in Excel add-ins, the default row and default field method. So now we need to just discuss about one more concept, which is basically table indexes. We have created here in the resort table, there were two table indexes. One was resort IDX, which was non-duplicate, and the other one was resort group IDX, which allows the duplicates value because the group ID can be repetitive. For multiple resort can have the same group ID here. So basically, what are table indexes? These are basically physical structures. Those are used to improve basically the read performance. Already the experienced programmers know about it. Also it ensures the uniqueness, just like we have resort IDX allow duplicates is no. So this will allow the unique value in this resort IDX index. If there is one field, if there are multiple field, the combination of those multiple field will not be allowed. So in this way, that is called a composite key, you can call it. So, and this is also used for ordering data in a table. So basically, whenever the new records are inserted, updated or deleted, so the index is also updated. So we need to be just careful not to just add so many indexes or so many fields into indexes. A reasonable or intelligent decision must be made because this will otherwise hit the performance definitely. And normally, what are basically typical indexes? These are basically collection of fields. Just like in this way, there is only one field, but there can be multiple field value or key values, and then definitely wherever this index value is stored, so there will be a bookmark reference against those combination of the fields or single field that refers to the actual data. Means actual data means the value hold in that field. So that bookmark reference in the index will basically point to that actual data. And finding a record matching a given key involves going to appropriate location in the index where that key is stored. Then basically we have to follow the pointer to the location of actual data. So basically there will be two operations performed. One is the seeking of the index itself, and then looking up to get the actual data on that location which is stored in the index. So basically, whenever we search for a record, then SQL Server is able to determine the best index or indexes to use for that particular query. Uh, so what SQL does here, when we search for a record, SQL Server is able to determine the best index or indexes to use for that particular query. If we realize that we often require the same set of fields from a specific query, we can create an index that contains the keys we wish to search on and the fields we wish to fetch. This improves the performance considerably, and then SQL will use that index and can then simply return the value that already exists in the index. So in this way, this can further improve by marking the fields we simply wish to return as included column basically. So this is the included column. So basically in the index you can see there is one whenever you drag and drop the one field or multiple field into the index, you can see there is an included column property. So what does basically what does it do? So included column is just like when you put an SQL query. So the SQL query, the select statement will contain certain fields. For example, if there are 5 fields, A, B, C, D, E, there are 5 fields in a select statement. So if those five fields, if you put in the index here and then mark it as included column yes, so basically it will efficiently return the the field values against those fields which are already included in the select statement. So I'm talking about SQL Server now. When you create an index in SQL Server and you query with the SQL statement, so basically the index will help in efficiently reading those field values if those are part of an index. So, but in the similar fashion on the table level, you can just make it as included column, and then when you use for example set based operation or the x plus plus query, so in that way that can make use of if it is a part of an index, so the search will be very efficient. But however there will be definitely a load when there is a very big huge table with lots of records in it. So so it should be a careful decision to include whenever necessary fields are needed every time. So there is one more concept about this which is called clustered index basically, and which I have selected here. So in the cluster index, I have used the resort IDX, and resort IDX basically contains only a single field here. So basically, what is difference between a normal index and a cluster index? Basically, a cluster index will return instead of the field selected in that index, the whole record will be kept in the index. So in that way, the cluster index is different than the normal index, and that should be also kept in mind that this decision should also be keeping in mind that how many records are in that table. So basically each time, for example in a sales table, the if I can show you, because sales table or sales line table are very huge table when specifically there is a retail industry, so this is a very huge. So here you can see the sales IDX is basically a cluster index, and once you go to the sales IDX, it is containing this sales ID value. So this will basically help whenever a record with the sales ID is searched in that table, so it will just help in that case. But that decision need to be a very careful decision, because the whole record will be kept in the cluster index. So that will basically avoid lookup in the data for any field. Instead of field, the whole record will be there. So basically cluster index are also sorted by their keys, As the index contains the entire record, it can add a significant load to SQL Server, basically if records are inserted as opposed to being appended at the end of a table. So in case of, for example, setup tables where the record number are smaller, changes very infrequently, and this is not a big problem there, and basically read benefit is far better than the drawbacks. But in transactional table, basically we need to be careful. uh, we should have a cluster index, but the key must be sequential. That is, like sales ID, the number sequence is used, and records then will be added at the end of table instead of a middle of table. So, but if the records are inserted in the middle of table by not having a sequential, that is a number sequence or sequential number there, so that will be a big problem when you will be inserting a new record. And that setting can also be done in number sequence to insert it in mid table. That should be avoided in case if it is a cluster index. So I hope that explains it a lot. And whenever in that case the new record is inserted, so there will be a huge delay. Also, there will be unnecessary load on SQL Server. So that's it for now, and then in the next video we will be moving to our the header and line table for the resort management system. And till then, thank you very much, and just stay tuned. Thank you.